Thank you. My name's Paul Chodziza and my grandfather George was on the Dunera. His deportation is the reason why myself and my family were brought to Australia. We are all connected to an experience endured by a group of men, women and children some 85 years ago. Some of us are here connected by family, some of us are connected through research, some through interest, and some, no doubt, here for the food. It's coming. All of us on the committee are committed to preserving history and keeping the memory of all internees alive. There were over 2,500 that arrived in Australia in 1940 via the Dunera and the Queen Mary. One of the most remarkable things about the internees is the depth of extraordinary people that were in Hay and Tatura. There were painters, musicians, sculptors, I'll work on that one, academics, politicians, and many extraordinary talented people. There were also many less known, hard-working, decent, dare I say, ordinary internees. My grandfather George was one of these. Our grandpa, who was far from ordinary in our eyes, passed away in 1981. I was only 17 and my brother Simon, who's going to speak shortly, I was 15, he was 17. Did I say that the right way? He's older. Perhaps typical of teenage boys, we weren't overly inquisitive or curious. If we knew then what we know now, I'm sure we would have had many more questions. Whether our grandfather would have shared the story is another matter. As very similar to other internees, he wasn't overly forthcoming. My much older brother Simon is now going to share a bit about George and then read a passage from his diary about his Dunera voyage. Thank you.
I could say save your applause until after I finish, but it's too late. That's George there, good-looking man. He looks surprisingly like my dad at the same age, and the good looks finished with me, and my younger brother didn't get any of them, so apologies, and he has no right to reply now. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about George, and then I'm going to read some extractions from his diary, and he journaled the trip on the Dunera, so it's really quite insightful. George was born in 1900 in Berlin. He was born into a reasonably comfortable Jewish family, although his parents weren't overly religious. His father, Ludwig, remarked in one of his letters that he hadn't seen the inside of a synagogue, he'd seen the inside of a synagogue once in 60 years. Both of his parents, though born in Poland, identified as German citizens. Ludwig was a lawyer of some repute with many famous and some infamous cases, which I can tell you about afterwards. I won't get them recorded. George was well educated with a degree in engineering. He had a good job with a telecommunications company. He married a lawyer, Dorothea, and they had a son called Wolfgang, who was my father, and were living a comfortable, productive life in Berlin as Hitler came to power. In 1939, George escaped to England, ended up in the Kitchener camp in Kent, and then was later imprisoned on the Isle of Man. He was deported to Australia on HMT Dunera, interned at Hay, and then later at Tatura. His wife and his son escaped to Chile via Italy. We've got a diary from our grandfather entitled How I Came to Australia, and the diary gives, as I said, a unique insight into the Dunera voyage. There's a couple of things about the diary that really stand out to me. Firstly, George has an amazing sense of recall. Presumably he didn't document on the boat, as there was no writing paper, maybe rolls of toilet paper. So it came afterwards, and given that it came afterwards and he wrote it in German and then translated it to English, there's a lot of really good detail in there. The other insight is how little it tells me of my grandfather himself. There's lots of information, but no emotion, nothing on what he felt or even what he experienced himself personally. It's all about facts, dates, incidents, and chronology. It tells about the voyage in excellent detail, but not about the man himself. So the extract I'm going to read is when they embarked onto the Dunera, and this is after a day's travel from the Isle of Man to Liverpool, which I think they got to Liverpool about 7 p.m, so it's a full day travel, no food, right? So I get hangry about 3 p.m. This was 7 p.m. So I'll read. This is July the 10th, 1940. The transfer to the Dunera begins. Everyone has to carry a suitcase handed to him. The suitcases are stacked in the open and soaked by the rain. On the gangway to the quay, the first incident takes place. One man who cannot get quick enough over the gangway gets a kick from the captain in charge of the transport. All have been asked to form 4 ranks in front of the steps leading to the gangway of the Dunera between rows of guards, and then quickly onto the ship. Arriving at the top of the stairs, one is confronted by a row of soldiers with steel helmets and fixed bayonets, shouting, "Hurry up." Nevertheless, there is time to observe at the end of the gangway the broken suitcases and other articles lying around being searched by soldiers under the eyes of the Liverpool Military Police. In a hurry, we pass the sinister-looking and shouting guards and get onto the ship. There, a new surprise awaits us. All luggage, such as suitcases, bags, rucksacks and other articles, violins, typewriters, etc., is grabbed by a wild gang of soldiers and flung in a high arc onto a big heap, irrespective of its contents. Even the gas mask is pulled over our head. Where this is not done, enough kicks and rifle butts follow on. Now, I've never been on a cruise before, but I'm guessing they start with drinks and nibbles. This was very, very different. He goes on to document the conditions on board, many of the incidents, including the torpedoes, the stop in the journey down the west coast of Africa and Cape Town, and then the trip across the Indian Ocean to Australian territorial waters. Fast forward to the 6th of September, George writes, "The morning of the 57th and last day of travel on which we are to leave the Dunera for good starts with fog. At about 10 o'clock, the sun breaks through, and through the portholes one can watch the entry into the wonderful harbour of Sydney with all its bays. At 10:30, the pilot comes on board, and the tug tows the ship under a beautiful bridge into the inner harbour where the ship makes fast on the quay. The sea voyage has ended." George then went on to document the train trip to Hay, where he says the travel is pleasant, the seats in the carriages are nicely upholstered, and the accompanying Australian soldiers are very engaging. So to finish the story, George's wife passed away in Chile in 1943, and his son was cared for by a Jewish family. I've actually seen the telegram that Grandpa got, and it said, "Wife dead, son being looked after." Imagine that way of finding out. He remarried, brought up his son, and led a very productive life. So over that 5-year period, he lost his father at Theresienstadt, 2 of his sisters, one in Auschwitz. His wife he'd been deprived of all of his son's formative years. Now 80 years on, the family, which had shrunk to 2, now numbers over 30. So we've also been very productive. And these 30 are the ones that will be the ones to keep George's legacy alive. Thank you. And I'm now going to pass over to our President, Seamus.